Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Doja Live, August 2nd, 2022. For our first and also our last show of the week, we've had a few reschedules happening, but it means it's going to be a really, really good one. Joining me to co host today is America Guerrero.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, America. And of course, the star of today's show is Jan Arendtsz, who is the CEO of Siligo. Did I get that right? I've been struggling.
I'm a little bit of work on that.
Guys, language and accents are not my forte. The proper pronunciation of your company, Jan, is
Siligo.
There you go.
America. You show off. Siligo.
Siligo.
Maybe. Ah, gosh, you know what? I'm gonna give up. I know when it's not my thing. But here we go. We're gonna be talking about automating and business. And it's going to be a good one. But before we get to it, let's learn a bit more about you, Jan. If you could tell us a bit about your background and everything that led up to where you are today. Thank you.
Sure. First off, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. All right. So I got started in terms of professional background or training. I have a degree in computer science. So I'm technical, but it's been a fairly long time since I've been technical. So
A little rusty.
Yeah, so I finished school and then I got a job as a developer where I spent about 2.5 years working for a software company in Austin, Texas. And I think within about 6 months, it became pretty clear to me that sitting in a cubicle and churning out code hour after hour without understanding like why we're doing this, what's the business problem we're trying to solve, without having any influence, someone's telling you go write some code here. I knew that was not going to be my calling. But I also, even though I was young, I think there was a sixth sense that told me that it's good to have this technical foundation because it's going to help when you switch over to the business side. So that was that little voice in my head saying that, and I listened and I spent 2.5 years. And then I think where I really cut my teeth and I really came of age, if you will, was when I joined this global consulting company called Cambridge Technology Partners. It was a really well-known company back in the mid-90s. And I spent 4 years there, and it seems like 10 years, right? I got to work on all kinds of different projects. And this was also when the web was fairly nascent. It was the start of the .com era. So before we knew it, here in San Francisco, there were a bunch of 20-some, 30-some folks going and designing e-com products for all these bizarre startups trying to do sell stuff when no one really knew anything. We were all learning. But that's where I really learned about business. About how the intersection of technology and business and how you solve, how you use technology to solve business problems, so on and so forth. So I played roles, anything from like a business analyst, a technical project manager, a solution architect, so on and so forth. Awesome experience. Then dabbled around in a startup or two that didn't really go anywhere, but some good life lessons. And then maybe the segue into how Siligo was started was back in 2003. I joined this young SaaS company when there were only a few SaaS companies on the planet. And I spent 3 years there, and that really absolutely opened my eyes. Within, I think, 3 months, I went from like, what the heck is this, to I think this is going to be the future of.
And you were not wrong.
Yeah, but I mean, looking back, you can say, gosh, that was a no-brainer. But back at that time, it was unclear, right? Because I don't know if you guys remember, Salesforce had this campaign, no software. They had the line drawn across it. And a lot of the other established software vendors, of course, wanted to protect themselves. So they didn't really want to espouse the SaaS model. Anyhow, so through that, that's what really opened my eyes towards the cloud model, the SaaS model. And this was when I was in my early 30s. I knew I wanted to start a business, didn't have an idea. And then it all came together as part of that gig. Ended up taking somewhat of a different path. I started a consulting company and ran it for about 5-6 years. And through that came the idea to start Celigo. In fact, we took some of the resources there and seamlessly morphed into a product company and started Celigo back in 2011.
All right. And Celigo, what is it that you do exactly? The problem that you're solving?
Yeah, so we provide a platform that allows both business and technical users to be able to automate business processes, automate anything, data, applications, but think of it, I think an easier way to think of it is to automate business processes and to do it predominantly through integration. So we are an integration-centric automation play. So you might go like, what does that mean? Think about all the various business processes that a typical company may have. It could be anything from how you serve your customers, customer support, or it might be how your front office, your salespeople close deals, and how that gets into the back office and how you recognize those deals and fulfill those deals and ship if it's an inventory product. But so these are all well-established business processes. And if you look at the evolution over the last 10, 15, 20 years in terms of this massive investment in SaaS, companies of all sizes, small companies, mid-sized companies, large companies, have tons of these business applications all through the cloud. So back in the old days, a business process that likely was encapsulated within one business application or maybe a couple are now splintered across many different business applications. And we all face this, right? Because as employees of companies, we know the number of apps that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this sprawl of SaaS applications. Then there's fragmentation because the business process is now chopped across multiple applications. And this is where we come in. We allow companies that have invested in the cloud to get a better return on their investment in being able to connect these applications through integration and other means. And we can get into some of the details and be able to automate these processes, both applications and data.
Yes, let's do, which is a great segue, I think, into today's topic as chosen by Yugan. What's that, America?
Automating the enterprise through integration of applications and data. How can businesses unlock growth through automating business process, especially in a post-pandemic environment? Why is this question important? Why the post-pandemic environment, John?
So in very simple terms, we've seen it firsthand that for businesses to scale and grow, they need to focus on automation. And automation comes in many different flavors. It can be, a simple workflow where it might be, hey, something happens, you need to send an email here, so on and so forth. Or it might be within a single application. And a lot of the applications that we use today have built-in workflows, or it might be spanning multiple different applications. But for companies to really be able to scale, especially given the sheer number of SaaS applications that they have to be able to automate those business processes and optimize it. And for sure, we saw this magnified during the pandemic when companies just absolutely went from like, what the heck's happening to either we need to cut costs, we're working remotely, so what worked before is not going to work, and ultimately, and I'm happy to expand, here later on, it led to just an absolute uptick in demand for what we do.
That's why you build this quote that I saw on your website. It comes to a point where we can no longer ignore what's going on in the real world.
Absolutely. Again, right? To scale, you have to focus on this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to be left behind. And by the way, just coming back to the pandemic, companies were forced to change their practices in a very short time span, right? Within about a 3 to 6 month time span, from like April 2020 to maybe September, a lot of companies changed the way they do business. And as part of that, they modernized, they focused on automation. And so if you're not doing it, you're going to get left behind.
In that area, what are the spaces that you particularly saw automation increase? So maybe if you could walk us through like a case study or an example of whatever that might be. Is it now having to have your team, clock in or remotely, or was it just like nobody? You know what? We're going to do away with clock-ins, or where are these pieces that suddenly companies were using software and the need for automation that they might not have had before?
Yeah, so let me start by saying that it is across the board. It's not one particular thing. And I'll give you maybe arguably the most representative example, but it could be everything from how do you ship your products? How do you connect with your supply chain? How do you touch your customers, the customer experience, especially during the pandemic when the way you do it, your traditional ways had to change. It might be on how you work with your employees, how you onboard your employees, how you kind of manage your employee life cycle. It might have to do with how you quote your products and sell your products. We saw an increase in demand and the need for optimizing and automating these types of use cases of business processes.
Yeah. Even going from maybe like from cutting a physical check to having a automatic deposit.
It's pretty comprehensive. But as promised, I'll give you maybe one representative example that I think most of your listeners can relate to, and that's companies that sell physical products, right? Tangible goods. If you think about that, you might be manufacturing the items yourself through a contract manufacturer, depending on your size. You might be a wholesaler and carry other people's products, so on and so forth. So there's the whole building of the product. There's a supply chain involved there. But especially when it comes to selling the product and selling it online, and then being able to ship that product and ship it on time, because in this day and age, customer satisfaction is paramount. And then what we call reverse logistics, where I ordered some shoes, doesn't fit, I need to return it. How do you handle that whole cycle? How do you market to your consumers, so on and so forth? Excuse me. So this is what we call a typical order to cash business process, right? From the time you place the order to ultimately getting the cash and recognizing that revenue. So let me just use the example of maybe what we call a direct to consumer type entity. A company, they might be building these cups and they want to sell it. And in the past, they might have offered this in a retail store, and that's it. Well, during the pandemic, everything was shut down. So now they're scrambling like, we need to have this online. We need to have our own web presence, as an example. Or we need to offer this on a third-party marketplace, such as on Amazon or Walmart. And so we are the glue that puts that all together. From let's say you're using Shopify to run your e-commerce, your web store. The order is placed. We are pulling the orders, inserting it into your order management system or your ERP. Then you might have an outsourced third-party logistics provider. We have to send that order to that party, or you might have your own internal warehouse management system, so on and so forth, right? All that plumbing, and this is a fairly complex business process with many different use cases, including ultimately handling those returns as needed. So that's, I think, a great example of where we saw a tremendous uptick, and that continues to this day.
And so within the business units, within these enterprises, and how you're helping to automate these processes, who gets to take advantage of this? Like, is it the IT department, or who is directly feeling the relief that Siligo gets to offer? Who benefits?
Great question. So, and I'm going to maybe give you a couple of different answers. There's who benefits and who is the one who is the buyer in the end. So in general, we want to serve both the IT and line of business departmental leaders. But in general, given that it's a platform play, we tend to sell more on the IT side. But the champion might be more often than not, is a business person. It might be the head of HR. It might be the sales leader. It might be the VP of finance. It might be the director of e-commerce. They are the ones who have that business problem. They're the ones who are looking for a solution. And depending on the solution that they want, or the problem they want to solve, the size of the company, the maturity of the company, the buyer can be either absolutely straight up a business buyer, or it can be IT. But ultimately, the benefit, to answer your question, is, of course, to those business owners of that business process. That order to cash business process that I outlined is ultimately owned by one or multiple people, and they're the ones that benefit from it.
Nice. And I guess it's because it's now going back to the business owner. I actually get to take ownership of the software that I've chosen and that I'm utilizing. And if something, that integration piece and everything is just a lot easier, and not having to, let's say, wait on my IT guys or gals to help out with that.
Gosh, I should hire you into my marketing department, because I could not have said that.
We can talk post show.
any better. So a couple of kidding aside, a couple of notes that you hit is one, time is of essence, and waiting behind that so-called IT queue, right, for IT to free up, sometimes can work, but oftentimes, especially in this day and age, doesn't work. That's why we cater both in terms of who we sell to, but also the users of the platform to straddle that line between technical and business users. So again,
Empowered.
that order to cash. What's that?
You feel empowered.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And that's absolutely the key, is we want those business owners who understand the applications, that domain, understand the business process. We want to empower them and put them to task to get this done. Now, sometimes these integrations, automations can get technical pretty fast, and you will need technical help. But other times it doesn't, as long as you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And that is really the key, and really the catalyst for starting Siligo in the first place. And if you look at our mission, it's really about empowering both business and IT, not just IT.
So I'm assuming Siligo's super easy to use. Or how did you make that happen? If it's someone like me who's not a technical person, but I'm a business owner and I want to start automating and integrating, I get brave enough to try it on my own. How do you make it easy for me?
So I wish I could sit here and tell you that we figured this all out back in 2011. We didn't. We built a product, and frankly, it was not good enough. So we decided to cut bait back in 2015, and excuse me, we took all of our learnings from the so-called less than ideal product, but also it was a pivotal time. I think starting in about 2013, 2014 is when we really saw that explosion of applications come into the market where the SaaS model really was on steroids. And we try to foresee, well, what would these companies that are onboarding all these applications with all this data, what would they need? And so a lot of companies don't have the luxury of taking a step back and saying, I'm going to start with a fresh canvas and I'm going to build this new product. And that's what we did. We released our platform in early 2016. It took us a few years to be able to fill in some of the gaps and get it to a place where it was mature. But I like to say that it was the single most important, meaningful decision we made as a company. Super painful to start over from scratch. But looking back, frankly, just a no-brainer.
Wow. Okay, and congratulations. And I think under your leadership and the leadership of others to be able to make such a challenging but correct decision. So kudos. You just mentioned a piece that we haven't talked to too much, and that is the data component. So how are we automating or how are we utilizing this data?
Yeah, and these days when we talk about data, well, different connotations, but there's so much of data that it's overwhelming. Anything and everything that you need to do has data, and we make a lot of decisions based on data. I mean, certainly larger companies do that, but we're seeing even smaller companies are now forced to act on data. So one example that I will cite is a concept of a data warehouse and having a BI, business intelligence type tool. Well, guess what? And most companies need that. We have a data warehouse and we do everything based on data. Well, how do you get that data into a data warehouse from your CRM, from your ERP, from your marketing automation system? That's again where we come in. And so this is what we call, instead of application integration, we call this data integration, where we are now ingesting data in a very easy to understand and use and quick to market fashion to be able to suck the relevant data from your operational systems and ingest it into this data warehouse, and then also be able to maybe take some of the summary data from a data warehouse and put it back in some of the operational systems as well. So that's something that we're investing a lot in. We are still fairly early stages in that journey, but just looking at our thousands of customers and their needs, it's just such a predominant use case right now.
Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out with the ownership aspects and the empowerment aspects that we're seeing across the individual sort of business units and how they're able to, automate that, but then maybe collectively break down some silos between units, right, based off of that data.
Absolutely. And in this particular example, you're serving so many different business units because everyone wants to take their data and make sense of it.
For sure. And talking about, and I think this is my final question for you today, we are coming up to the end and then we're going to touch back on company culture here in a bit. But I think my question is this: are you able to also make recommendations? Like, let's say, how does this work? As me, as a company, as an enterprise, do I come in and say, we're utilizing all these applications, help me integrate them? Or are you also able to fill in some of those gaps of
like a consulting element?
Yeah, like a consulting element. Have you considered this, or have you considered scratching that one? Or I mean, in some ways, maybe less is more. I think there was actually a show we had a while back, and this was with James Layfield of Clearfind, and his argument was that you have too much software. So, is there this pendulum? Are we going to kind of be coming back to just the best of the best, or how do you see that working?
Certainly I have my thoughts on that, but we don't have the time to break that down.
Big question.
Look, but I'm I'm not the judge of that, right? Companies have done what they've done. Our job is to assist them to make sense of it and to be able to optimize that. And so the short answer to your question is yes, based on who the company is, the industry that they're in, and their size, there's immediate pattern recognition. And we can immediately then say, oh, yes, we worked with companies with a similar profile. And we know that these are the business processes that they focus on automating. So said in a different way, when you think about business processes, and I'll give you a really quick example, employee onboarding is something that any company in any industry is going to face. But shipping products is only going to be a business process that's applicable to certain types of companies. The SaaS company is not shipping products, right? So it's just being able to understand the application landscape, the maturity, and the industry and the business processes, and we can immediately be able to say, this is what success looks like for you. We can start small and you can expand as you go.
Fair enough. And I think that's also just trusting your users to know that they know what's best for them. I like that.
And sometimes they don't, and we have to also be bold enough to tell them that they. Yeah.
Very cool. So as we come up to the final minutes of our show, let's spin it to the usual, America.
Let's touch culture. I can see that innovation and ownership are really great values that you're encouraging to your employees, but I can also see that you empower your employees with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why? Why is it important at Celigo?
Yeah, so the real quick story is in the summer of 2020, when there was so many things happening in the world, and we were watching the aftermath of George Floyd. We had an all hands meeting, and we were debating on like should we take a minute of silence, so on and so forth. And then it just all happened naturally. I spoke about some of my experiences and the need where we can take a back seat or we can be more proactive, and we have a choice. And I think the time has come, given the times we live in, that I think I used the term, we need to take a stand. And that term turned into a movement within Celigo called Take a Stand. It's still alive and thriving today. There's an entire committee. They're doing, this is not a check the box type activity. It's like, oh, others are doing it, we need to do something, right? No, this is entirely organic. It's just amazing. I'm really, really proud of my team for what they've done and the impact that they've made through that. And that's what gave birth to our DEI initiative.
That's really beautiful. And with your company also, you talked about, an initiative and a group of people. Here we call ours leadership teams, where it's basically, if you see a problem, if you want to find a solution, do it, right? Find like-minded individuals and create something. And it's really a way that we're also able to elevate the DEI. And I think particularly not just the diversity. In some ways, one might argue that diversity is innate, right? We are going to inevitably be diverse. But how can we make all of that diversity become equitable and inclusive? And sadly, I think sometimes it's on the onus on the individuals who want to raise their voice and be included to be the catalysts of that. What does that process of like the leadership teams or how are you building or have you built that part of your culture?
Yeah, so I'll quickly answer that by saying that we spent a fair bit of time, about I'm going to say 18 months back, on our values. We did it. It sounded not who we were, so we said, no, that's not it. We're going to do it again. And I'm incredibly proud of what the team has done. In fact, if you go to celigo.com/values, you'll see it listed. We live and breathe these values, and as leaders, I think we are transparent enough. It's part of our culture across the board to hold each other accountable, especially when it comes to values. Sometimes we might be in a meeting and someone might say that doesn't espouse what we set out to do. So that's something that was very organic again, and I just love what we did there.
Well, congratulations. You know, we are unfortunately at the end of our show today. You, Jan, particularly as a leader of Celigo, I want to say congratulations. What I hear throughout the story, and you particularly, is this ability to recognize when you are on a correct path or a wrong path, and the bravery to turn around, which is the quickest and best, I think, definition of progress, right? You're not going to progress if you keep going in the wrong direction. And so kudos to you. I am incredibly inspired and encouraged by that element of your leadership. Congratulations.
Thank you
so much for joining.
Kind words, and thank you for having me on the show.
It's our pleasure. Stick around just one moment, please, as we go off air. Folks, we actually did have to have a reschedule for tomorrow's show. So like I said, this is the first and last show of the week, but please join us on Monday for our recap, where we'll give you more insight on what we thought about Jan and his company Celigo. Gosh darn it, Celigo.
You got it once, but
Celigo. I know we're gonna have to do like a what do you want to call it, a bloopers here. Beep, okay. Beep, beep, beep. We'll get a blooper reel here. I apologize. Thank you so much for your graciousness. Have a good one, everyone, and stay safe.